Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Contour Community Meeting. Today is March 23rd, 2021. I confused this with another community meeting that I hosted an hour ago and said that that was the Contour Community Meeting. And they, of course, reminded me that that was not the Contour Community Meeting. This is the Contour Community. So welcome, everyone. So we have the first off, we got Contour office hours scheduled for KubeCon, or rather, we have slots for Contour office hours for KubeCon. So I wanted to talk about when you would like these to be. We have the opportunity to schedule these. So let me bring up the link. We actually, incubating and sandbox projects can schedule up to 2 45-minute sessions. So if we look at these, we got Tuesday here, Wednesday, Thursday, we got a bunch of things. So entirely up to you when you want to host these. These are for in CET time. So I can sync with you all on Slack later to just see when you want to do these, to make sure that we cover the right time zones and everything, making sure that we are aligned there. So yeah, just brief update. I'll ping you all on Slack.
Hey, Jonas, I think we're kind of limited to late afternoon Pacific time so that we can get like Nick on there as well, right?
Yeah, so we'll see how we want to do that. If we want to do, yeah, what kind of dates? Which is why I'm going to bring this up on Slack instead of doing this in this meeting.
Yeah,
not everyone is.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep. All right, Daniel.
Yeah, so Gateway API upstream validation progress. So last week over the past few weeks, we've had a lot of discussion about validation and status conditions. And I wanted to point everyone to this where the conversation is happening upstream related to this topic. I think it's worth a read. So a couple points here is Rob Scott, who's the technical lead of Gateway API, and James Peach, who put together the status conditions, basically kind of all the status spec for Gateway API upstream. And a couple things that's happening is this validating webhook is kind of stuck in neutral. I think Christopher, who took it on, is on paternity leave. Maybe that's part of it. But as part of the discussion, we said, okay, well, what are some things here? And one of them is like, well, couldn't we come up with like a validation package that all implementers use, as well as the implementation of the validating webhook uses? And it looks like I've got support for that idea. And so, this just to kind of go back to our discussion, we talked about, well, let's have a package in Project Contour that's used between Contour and the operator. I think this is really the best approach, is that the validation happens upstream with the API. So as the API evolves, the validation package evolves, and again, hopefully we can leverage the validating webhook to make that happen. But maybe even in the near term, we just consume the validation package directly. So I'm going to work on putting that validation package together. The other part of the discussion too is around the complexity of all these different status conditions, and I think there's some feedback that aligns with my thought of like, I think it's overly complex. Maybe we got ahead of ourselves here and we should kind of simplify the status and status conditions. There's so many conditions that to me like aren't needed, that should really be taken on by validation. And so I just wanted to share this with the team. Probably worth a read. And if you have any thoughts or ideas, feel free to jump in the conversation as well here. So I'll stop there and just get any kind of feedback. If there's none, then again, feel free to jump in the conversation on that issue and share your thoughts.
Yeah, it seems like it'd be great to have this stuff upstream because, yeah, thinking through it, pretty much, I think most of the stuff that we've talked about is not Contour specific. So it'd be great to have the community collaborate on it and just make it reusable there.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Steve. The one piece that stands out off the top of my head, maybe there's some others, but it's that, the one validation that we have is that, Gateway listeners must be, 2 listeners, right? We can't have more than that. So that's specific to Contour, and not sure where we want to implement that. I mean, let me think that through, but yeah, I imagine we would want to consume the upstream validation that's created, and then add to that in a validation package. I don't know. Let me think through that a little bit. But yeah, in general, I think it belongs upstream. So I'm actually going to hopefully today submit a PR that's just kind of like the basics. Try not to get ahead of myself. So everyone upstream is on board, and then if and when that merges, then that's when we'll have to kind of bump our depths to consume the validation.
I pushed a PR this morning, which makes the listeners dynamic in Contour. So no one wants to look at that. So then you could have any number of listeners based on the gateway.
Oh, nice.
So I know Nick had a design doc, which we never really finished. And we kind of said, hey, let's just make it 2 for now. But some of the gateway processing, it's hard to do without just, I guess, throwing out all of the gateways listeners. Do you know what I mean? Like if you didn't have 2, I mean, there's no way to even know, I guess, if they were, which one was insecure, which one was secure. I guess only based on if one had a cert and one didn't have a cert. You know what I mean? But in theory, nothing stops someone from having a cert on both. And then what do you do? That sort of thing. So to me, there was too many edge cases around that. So I have it in there. So it doesn't change anything how Contour works. It just makes the names be dynamic now. So if someone wants to take a look at that, we can do that. There's also a PR for status that's been in there for a few weeks that can get looked at as well, which sets status on HTTP routes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me look at that. The first PR you were mentioning, trying to, let me look at the PR and try to wrap my head around it.
Just coming back to the validation thing for a sec, one other nice thing about having it upstream is that the Gateway API repo, if it goes in there, is not yet 1.0, which means we can putting validation code in there doesn't mean we have to maintain backwards compatibility forever. Like we can break the interfaces as they're evolving. Whereas dropping it into the Contour repo, we kind of have to maintain compatibility forever once we put something in there that's externally importable.
Yeah, good point.
So.
Cool. Any other questions, comments here for Daniel? Good stuff. And want to talk about the Gateway API design doc as well?
Yeah, just appreciate everyone reviewing it and taking that feedback and just keep trying to make it better. And there's a comment that I have in there that Nick, as well as Steve S, looks like you commented here recently too, of just like trying to move this thing forward. I'm open to let's do an implementation. I think the 2 options that I suggested is in the comments. Just trying to figure out how we could kind of move this thing forward. And that was just something that I thought, okay, well, implemented in Contour, implemented in the operator, and depending on what that controller string is will depend on, who does what. So I don't know, maybe it's just tomorrow, which I'm not going to be able to attend. I have tomorrow off to deal with a family issue. So I won't be able to be at the call tomorrow, but anything we could do to make progress, I'm all for. I have no, it honestly doesn't matter to me if the gateway controller is an operator or Contour. It really doesn't. I just want to try to keep moving this forward. So I'm not sure if there's anything else that anyone feels that can be done other than, or I don't know, I guess I'm just looking for guidance here. So last week we spoke, working on the design doc, working on the validation upstream, and if there's anything else I could do to try to move it forward, let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm the one causing all the issues, but for me, the operator was presented as, hey, it's a way to deploy Contour, and then it turned into a critical component for this API to work. And that just always felt weird for me. And then last meeting, I said, let's just go ahead and do it. And then the day after, I had a thought about, hey, maybe if we rethink how we're doing this, that's what I posted in Slack. We can re-engineer, rethink of how we're going to approach the problem. Instead of approaching it from a typical operator, which is just deploying another component, let's take that same idea, but put that into Contour, and it simplifies a lot of issues that come up with all these design docs. So that's just my idea. So I don't feel like we've had a discussion on that yet. I think some folks have to say, hey, let's not do it because it's hard. I just want to look at it now and say, hey, what's the best thing going forward, which we should do? Because right now, no one's using it. Right now, the API is alpha. Right now, half of it's not even implemented. So now's the time to do it in my head. Do you know what I mean? I get we want to move forward, but I'd rather move forward with the right solution. So if this isn't it, that's fine. But I'd be curious to hear what other folks think about that idea. And we can talk about it in Slack or on other channels or whatever. But that's just where I'm coming from. To me, I flipped it around, and that's where I am. So that's all. You know what I mean? I don't want to hold things up. I just don't want to also spin wheels if we're marching towards something that maybe isn't the best solution. And I'm not saying that what you've come up with and what we've done is so far is bad. It's just more of a different mindset in terms of some of how these different components have to interact. So whatever.
No,
if that needs
Steve,
to move forward,
I completely understand where you're coming from, and it does feel like there's kind of some scope creep there by implementing the gateway controller in the operator. I also understand, well, it's like, okay, well, on the flip side, it's like, I kind of see where Nick's coming from. And that's why I was like, okay, well, I do kind of see both sides of this. And I thought, okay, well, maybe the best way to get unstuck is, as I mentioned in that one comment of, okay, let's just proceed with both. They both can do this, and we can just use that controller string that tells, which controller to operate on a gateway. And so that's kind of where I'm at. But again, if the rest of the maintainer team says, no, we've now decided to move forward with, implementing the gateway controller in Contour, I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm all for it because, to your point, it does, implementing the gateway controller and the operator does feel like there's some scope creep outside of what a typical operator does. And so, my suggestion was, instead of like the gateway controller having to like set up the entire infrastructure, is like when the gateway controller starts up, if it's implementing Contour, it's just checking that things defined in spec exist, right? That we know, right? So in spec, gateway spec, we know that, hey, if there's addresses, those are the addresses for the Envoy service, right? And if they're defined, then the gateway controller that's implemented in Contour should go and verify that exists. And if not, then mark the gateway as invalid, right? Along with some of the other checks that it would do as well.
Yeah, maybe we're mixing up, different solutions. The last thing in Slack was that Contour would deploy Envoy. That was my idea. So we would revamp how the operator worked. Yeah. So instead of having like a separate outside controller, like the operator creating it, Contour, you would deploy Contour, and Contour wouldn't do anything until it's found a gateway. When it found a gateway, then Contour would go deploy Envoy. So it's sort of taking the idea of what the operator does, but simplifying it into Contour. So in that mode, Contour would say, hey, I'm spun up. I don't have any gateways yet. Then once a gateway exists, then it would go create envoys like the operator does today and would operate on that. So now all the message happening, all of that work is done in one process. And then if you want multiple contours, the downside is you've got to deploy Contour a few times, but Contour is still, managing all of its resources, still uses the same Contour config item, all that sort of thing is all the same. It just sort of flips around sort of some of who's responsible for what, you know what I mean?
Okay, I needed to look. You said that was in Slack.
Yeah, I can re-forward you the idea.
Yeah,
I should write up a
if you
formal
don't mind.
doc. It was just sort of like an idea. Hey, what do you guys think of this? And then we just never really had a meeting to talk about it. Again. It was literally, I was in the shower, and that sounds weird, but I was in the shower one night and I was thinking about it, and it was bugging me. And then I was like, hey, maybe this would work. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'll go find that and I'll forward that off to you.
At a high level, it does sound interesting, because when we talk kind of the different management layers, right? I mean, Envoy's the data plane, and Contour is the control plane for Envoy, and then the operator can be the control plane for Contour. So that at a high level, that does sound interesting. So yeah, I'd like to take a look, and
Yeah.
I also need to look at these couple PRs you're mentioning too.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, I like a number of things, Steve, about your idea. And just trying to think through it. I mean, it's like you still have Contour controlling a single gateway, right? So if you want multiple gateways, you need multiple contours. But you could actually still use the operator to dynamically deploy your multiple contours if you do want multiple gateways. So that's an option for folks, or they can statically deploy multiple contours if they want multiple gateways. So they can kind of pick and choose how they deploy there. And I think there are definitely some nice things about having it all, having that gateway controller within Contour. It's an interesting model because, each contour controls one gateway. So there's not like a single controller that controls all gateways. It's like, it's one per contour installation. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I think there's value in the fact that for users who don't want to use the operator, then they still get the gateway functionality. And I do think, that's something we've talked about for a while, and I'm still not sure that we've resolved. But like for users who there are going to be some users who want to use the operator, and then some users who don't want to use the operator. And so what's the story for the folks who don't want to use the operator? I think if we don't have some logic in Contour, then the story is pretty bad for those users. And I'm not sure that that's, going to fly long term.
Yeah, and I'm in 100% agreement that if Gateway API is kind of the API of the future, then we don't want people locked into the operator or any specific management tool. I mean, we want to be able to provide options. So I agree there.
Hey, Steve, I thought we came to the conclusion last time that if they want gateway APIs, then that's sort of the contract they're entering into. Is that like, it's not for everyone, right? But if you need it, you need this control plane to manage it, and that's exactly what the operator was doing. I don't know.
I don't agree that the APIs require you to have some sort of dynamic controller. To me, an API is a way of describing how traffic should route. And I think we can offer both options, though. I think we can have a dynamic provisioning version, which creates listeners on those things against the API. And then folks who want to still utilize the API but not buy into that should still have a path, is how I still feel. And that's kind of what we talked about. You know what I mean? And I think this third discussion is providing both, is just flipping around the idea of how you implement the bits. And this is from what Steve said before. I mean, Steve had a great point when we talked about this last time of making each thing a different component, right? There's a control plane component, there's an XDS server component, and then there's a data plane component. So how do you manage all those different pieces? And that's just taking that idea and implementing it differently. So
yeah, cool. Can you share with me your comment as well? The most recent thought you had. Cool.
And then just, procedurally, I mean, I feel like the only way we're going to resolve these things is by having in-person discussions. So, you know, I'm happy to have as many meetings as we can where everyone's available. You know, we know what the time slots are that work. So maybe we should just try and schedule a few more of those and just try and have some focused conversations and get to resolution on what paths we're going to take.
Do you think that this would maybe require a Contour version, major version bump, just because it kind of changes the paradigm a little bit? Or do you think it can fit within the one dot version scope?
Are there any
Yeah.
changes to APIs or?
I mean, the operation of Contour will change significantly, right? And I think it would be, I mean, I'm by no means I'm saying this is hard, we shouldn't do it, but it will take some thinking about upgrade testing and stuff more than we have now. And like, what happens when a Contour restarts? What happens when, whatever, like all these sorts of things, right? But I mean, I don't think that's a reason to not pursue the idea. I think that's just something to keep in mind while we do it.
Yeah, it might feature-wise be significant enough to do that. Yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. I think too many projects don't do a 2.0 when they should do a 2.0, you know, or like make significant developments when they should, and kind of just
Right.
get stuck.
Yeah, I mean, a major bump signifies, you know, like almost a paradigm shift, right? And so if Contour is changing a lot in support of gateway APIs and gateway APIs, you know, as a thing by itself, now that we're supporting it, that can definitely, yeah, be something to create a major release around. It'll be helpful for a project as well, I think, when we're ready.
And I mean, we don't have to go through all the minor details and we can talk about Steve K's other item, but I guess like when we're thinking about this, is there anything that people who are deploying Envoy themselves will lose? Or is it like an option to tell Contour, no, actually don't deploy me an Envoy, like I have an Envoy service for you, look at this, I don't want you to do this, like, I don't know, is there anything that other people who are deploying Envoy themselves will lose if this becomes the only way?
I mean, I think we still need to support both. I think there should be a way
Support,
that
like,
Contour
supply
can
your own.
dynamically deploy Envoy and configure it and provision it. I mean, the main reason for doing that is to allow listeners to be dynamic from the gateway.
Yeah.
Right. So if you had, you know, 2 listeners in a gateway, then suddenly you had 5.
Right.
You know, the idea that Contour should then, or something should then reprovision Envoy to say, all right, now you've got 5 listeners, go spin up these other, you know, other endpoints. Now it comes back to the reality of, well, how many times is that going to happen? You know what I mean? How many
Right.
listeners is someone really going to have on an L7 load balancer? If we were at L4, I can see it happening all over the place, right? You know, different ports are going to get spun up all the time. But for us, that's the reality, I think. So if someone didn't want to have that, that's what they would lose, I think. They would have to just, you know, change their gateway and then reprovision Envoy and then make them both match.
Because we would provide a mode where you bring your own Envoy deployment and we don't set it up for you, kind of deal.
Right.
I think, yeah, I
And
think
that
it
could
would
be-
make sense to keep that. Go ahead, Daniel, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that seems analogous to what was a feature for the operator had recently where you know, the operator can manage existing components, like,
Right.
and the only thing that needs to happen is that you I think it's label that component, and then the operator will see that it's now labeled and that it could start managing that. So that could be maybe an option if there's existing Envoys out there and users say, oh, I want Contour to now manage them. It's like, okay, we'll just, of course, make sure it's at a certain, you know, release version and label it, and that tells Contour to start managing it.
Yeah. The other thing I thought of, and this is just pie in the sky, was having some sort of web UI on Contour. And if you didn't have it auto managed, you can have it like give you the YAML that you should generate to like do upgrades and changes and stuff. You know what I mean? It's like you apply your gateway and you port forward to Contour and tell you, oh, here's the YAML for the envoys you'd need. And it could like generate it for you if you wanted help with that. something else you could do to help manage version to version things. Again, it's the same thing that the operator or Contour could do today automatically, but this would give you the YAML so someone could look at it or check it into source control or do whatever their practice is internally. You know, some folks check all that into Git and have Git, some other service account, run it automatically for you. Anyway,
That be for the UI, and I want to do a time check as well.
Yeah.
For the UI, maybe that's something that we could utilize Octant for.
possibly, yeah. And I've always wanted to build an Octant plugin for these things. We even for Gateway API, actually, for sure. That'd be pretty cool to help manage all of this.
Let's see if we can do that. So let's continue this discussion. You said you're going to set up more meetings, make sure that we do the right thing here, maybe even major version bump. So longer discussion that we have on today's community call. So
Hey, Jonas, can I just make one last comment though? Is
okay.
Especially because I'm not going to be here tomorrow for the maintainers call. Is that again, you know, I'm for whatever the rest of the team would like to do. I would say though, is if we're talking like, okay, you know, major changes and so forth, is that we also look at how can we get there incrementally, right? We did a release of Gateway API alpha, and I just don't want it to, for a number of reasons, that it just kind of sits the way it is for the next 6 months or whatever that time period may be, if we're talking like major changes. So if we could just keep that in mind, you know, it's like, hey, Steve, that's to your point, let's do it right the first time. But we're also in a situation that we released this feature, and I just want to make sure that we say, okay, well, you know, how can we make some incremental improvements and then ultimately get to where we want.
Sounds good. All right, we got one last thing here. Steve, Chris.
Yeah, this is just a quick thing. What I've been working on. So we shipped global rate limiting support in the previous release. So this is just a follow-up PR to that to add support for the X rate limit headers. There are some references in this PR and the related issue to the relevant Envoy docs and RFCs that explain some more detail about these. So we just now have a config setting to allow these. So check it out if you're interested.
Nice, awesome. And
Thanks,
with
Steve.
that, yeah, thank you. With that, we're at time. Have a great rest of the week, everyone. Chat with you on the maintainers call and on Slack.
Bye, guys.